Hi lovely people, it's Candy here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a VR. It's a VR I've been wanting to do for ages, to the lovely Whiskey Stevens, who a while ago she did a VR called Tarotsnapshot, where she wanted people to show the decks that were in their collection and to use the decks as a snapshot into where they were in their life when they bought the deck and why they bought the deck in that place in their life. So it's kind of like the your journey through tarot kind of shows your pathway of life. Now, I loved that idea. I love Whiskey's channel anyway. I think she's fantastic. But only having been involved in tarot for a year, it wasn't going to be much of a snapshot for anybody. But then I thought, I've always said that tarot doesn't feel new to me. It doesn't feel like I've only been a year doing tarot, because I've always had an art practice. And I thought, well, let's come at it from a different point of view. Why don't I share some artwork and then a few decks at the end to show how my journey with imagery and pattern and shape and symbolism and creating images has linked into my life path. Because for me, tarot and art witchcraft, it's all part of the same thing for me. So I am going to do a art/tarot snapshot to Whiskey Stevens. So it's going to be slightly different. So I've always been the kid that drew, always escaping up to my room, either playing the piano or drawing. That's where you could find me. I went to Hereford Art College to do my art diploma. I was there, having done all the different disciplines during my foundation year, so sculpture and clay and jewellery and metalwork and drawing and project work, that I realised that the place I always radiated back to was the textile lab and the sewing machines. And for me, the passion and the spark in art right from early days was textures, and finding different textures and layering textures. And again, that links to my tarot, because I've always said I am a layered slinger. I layer intuition and card meaning, and it's what I do in my art. I layer drawing and rubbings and textiles and cut work and paperwork and machine embroidery, and then I might do metal work and hang it off it, but it's always layered. And I ended up in London in the early 90s doing a degree in textiles, so it was very much fashion linked. It was weaving, knitwear and tapestry. And there was a very strong push towards the fashion industry, which I could never follow, because I have an inherent love of fine art and drawing and painting. And I ended up doing the knitwear option, but I did knitted and crochet sculpture. My first ever job was crocheting syphilis viruses for a hospital installation. That was my very first ever job. I did work for a while in the fashion industry, and I found a very old swatch. So I used to create knitwear swatches for fashion designers and sell those in America and in Italy and in London. I started creating boxed art with textiles and metalwork and beadwork and crochet sculpture, alongside huge chalk drawings. And I'll put a picture of one up that was based on fashion drawings as well. So again, my fashion link coming in. So fast forward, and I have now retrained for a year as a primary school teacher to try and get some regular income coming in. I've met my future husband. We very quickly got married. I found myself pregnant virtually immediately. And I want to fast forward you to a body of work called Making Sense, which was a joint exhibition I did with a really dear friend of mine called Rachel Grant. We were both young mothers and new mothers at the same time. and we talked daily. We had a lovely connection, and we decided to do a joint exhibition which was exhibited in Bilston Art Gallery together, called Making Sense, which was a exhibition of work, a body of work trying to make sense of becoming a mother and the way that that affects your psyche. This is before I knew that Tilly had a diagnosis of Mcginnis syndrome. The way I felt about being a mom surprised me. Looking back now, I know that Tilly had Mcginnis syndrome. It makes more sense. But at the time, I couldn't understand why I felt so protective. I just assumed it was typical protective mom vibes. You know, every mom wants to protect their kid, wrap them up in cotton wool and keep them safe from everything. But it was so extreme. I was obsessed, and a lot of that work that I entered into that Making Sense exhibition was trying to make sense of that feeling of that need to protect. So I did a lot of work based around the idea of nest building and looking at that protection in nature. So the fact that baby birds, they use thorns and twigs and hide the nest in a tree and line the nest in down and feathers to keep the eggs safe. So it was about eggs and safety and nests. I did a series of work called Nest Building 1 and 2, and that was the development of the square as a symbol of protection, almost like a house is made up of bricks and the building blocks and walls to keep people out and to create a boundary. That square became my my representation of that, my need to protect. Within that body of work also, I'd got the 2 girls by then at that point, and I was desperate for more children, and I became obsessed within that idea of nest building with eggs as well, and every month thinking that might be my last egg, that might be my last chance to have another baby, and it did become very obsessive. So I did a series of work as well, set on material with a square pattern throughout, but with circles cut out, each circle representing an egg, and the idea of letting them go, letting the chances of more babies go. So it was a reflection of my obsession at the time with growing a family and having more children. Another piece called Can't Help Looking Both Ways as well. It was a piece that tried to explore the idea of being grateful for the children that I'd got. At the time, my 2 girls, but also looking back at a dwindling supply of eggs in a barren wasteland and wondering how many were left, how many chances did I have to grow my family. And then things started to get really hard. Like I said, this is pre-diagnosis. There was no sleep at all. It was very, very hard in those days. And I did a piece called Mixed Moments, which was a piece to kind of explore how difficult things were. So with a big egg representing my child, born and precious, wrapped in squares to show how much I want to protect her, and within a nest setting. And from the nest I dangled words with a duality. So there was rest and exhaustion, there was happiness and depression, sadness, happiness. So all words that kind of summed up the fact I was quite shocked that it was both things. Motherhood was all these things. It was joy and then pain as well. Moments were very mixed, and looking back I understand why. But one of the words on the nest, the only one that didn't have an opposite word, was the word love. You might see on the nest it says love and love, because at no point, even in my hardest moments, did I ever not feel love. It was always love and love. And then after Making Sense, I've got the 2 girls. I decided to really push for it and get my life back under control. I started using my time really wisely in the art studio, or in the corner of the room, because I didn't have an art studio at the time. I would give myself, if I could only get in for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute, I would get in, because I had no time, no sleep, no time. But I realised that if you just grab whatever minute you've got, you can very soon get a body of work together. I started trying to find ways to bring art into every moment. I used to do a treasure walk, I used to call it, which is doing a loop with the prams, with the dog. Even this I can turn into art. And I used to collect basically rubbish that I found on this same loop, and I used to call it my treasure walk, and I used to arrange the objects into collections. I would find stories within them and instill stories into it. I would find meanings in the repetitive shapes that I would find, and then a new shape would come in and I would put a meaning into it. The treasure walk for me kind of sums up how closely linked reading tarot intuitively is to me for my art. It's about looking for connections and patterns and stories, and if I can do it with found rubbish on a 1 hour looped walk every day, then the cards just come so naturally to me. So I was doing my treasure walk, I was doing paper making and using recycled objects for my artwork, which led to me doing big school projects with like numerous schools. I did an 8-school project called the Battle of Bacteria, which was art and science linked, where I used recycled plastics and paperwork to explore bacteria. I did another music art link with another 8 schools, which was all about disco music, and I made huge canvases with made paper from the children from all age ranges within the schools. So that was really exciting. There was work coming in. I became a founder member of the Midlands Textile Forum, and I became the exhibitions coordinator and made lots of fantastic links there, putting on exhibitions and putting on events for them. There was one event called Voices from the Golden Triangle, where a woman brought her textile collection in for a few days of us drawing from it, which was amazing. And I found the most incredible textile piece with embryo type shapes on it, which led to a whole series of work then called my Connections series, which then got exhibited in Birmingham in a group called BVAC. And the Connections series was about balancing motherhood and the demands of motherhood with your own life force. The blue lines representing life force, and it was the first time I began to use the void to hold meaning. So I started creating handmade paper, and then I would hole punch it full of holes, and I called it my motherhood paper, because for me motherhood felt a little bit like people wanting bits of me and still finding a way to function with pieces of yourself constantly being pecked out, which was about how how connected I felt with my babies even before they were born. There was definitely a life force, a life thread, even though the holes were beginning to be pecked out, and it turns you into a new person. I also got a big commission for the Kendal Art Gallery up in the Lake District, which was a big 2-panel interactive art piece called Then and Now, which again was about motherhood. It was about how we feel motherhood is going to be before we become a mother, the then, and how we realise motherhood really is after we become a mother, the now. And I did a research paper. I sent it out to hundreds of women, and with a series of questions asking them what they thought motherhood would be like. Did it change after they had babies? So it went to women who were mothers and women who weren't mothers, and I collated all the information into some beautiful quotes, which I then sewed onto a then panel and a now panel. And I connected the two panels by the women being sucked through a vortex from the first panel across a washing line to the final panel, because part of motherhood, you do get caught up in the everyday slightly more. You know, there was washing, there was laundry. I'd got a baby that was projectile vomiting 24/7 and never sleeping. I never got away from the washing machine. And in the exhibition space, people were invited. There was a basket of laundry, little squares, and they were invited to come and put their own opinions about motherhood then and now on the little bits of laundry and to pin them up on the washing line. So that was the motto commission. So you can see there was a lot of, my art really does symbolise a snapshot through my life. So all was going really well. And then my gorgeous dad died. Very quickly, a best friend of mine died as well, which was shocking because she left a 6-year-old behind. And then within a few months, Tilly got diagnosed. What I thought was just a stage, and you know, she would grow out of it. She just had reflux and a learning delay. We suddenly got this really rare diagnosis of Mcginnis syndrome with only 600 cases in the whole world, and it felt like a bomb going off. It really did. And I stopped doing everything. I stepped down from the Midlands Textile Forum. I didn't take on any more work, and I stopped. And that kind of all coincided with things at home becoming more and more difficult and increasingly difficult. I did a little bit of work, tribute work for my dad, just because I was missing him so much. Me and my dad, we both got really odd thumbs, if you haven't noticed in my tarot videos. And I thought, there's nobody else alive now with thumbs like me. So I did some tribute work with my thumbprint, because you could always tell if Dad had been anywhere because his thumbs, he would leave his thumbprint on everything, because he always had dirty hands because he was a builder and a gardener, and he always had filthy hands, and he had workman's hands, and he would leave dirty huge thumbprints on everything, and you'd know that Dad had left it out. And I did a series of artwork with thumbprints fading away, and yeah, it was a tough time. So I didn't do anything for a while. Then I decided to start again, and the only thing I felt I could do to try and get out of the grief of Tilly's diagnosis was to explore it through my art. I didn't know any other way to explore it and get it out of my system, and I started doing a whole body of work called Mind the Gas, a sellout on the opening night, including a little bit of a kerfuffle with people fighting over pieces, which is a body of work which explored the fact that we all have a gap in our lives. We all think we're going to be on this path, and then something comes along and it shoves us onto this path, and that gap is always there. For some people it's health issues, for other people it might be a tragic death, or just death in general. Death can shove you onto a you know, if you've lost somebody, you'll know. For me, it was Tilly's diagnosis, you know, that it changed everything. And then divorce does it for some people. I had divorce a few years later, and betrayals, and life just throws curveballs. We all know it's not one curveball, it's another curveball. It might be redundancy and poverty, but there's always a gap. So I did an exhibition exploring that, and I used it to explore the 2-year recovery phase that it took me to recover from Tilly's diagnosis. And then the second bomb, after I'd just recovered into a more functioning space from Tilly's diagnosis, the realisation that there were second lives being lived, and the crumbling of my marriage. Very, very, very confused, as gaslit people often are, and as codependents within narcissistic environments are. I couldn't decipher what was going on. So one night I stayed up and I drew Enrage a paper doll. I'd got an illustration of a paper doll in front of me, and I felt that that was me. People were cutting and bending and folding me to their will, and if I dared to complain, my life was made horrific for the complaining. And I suddenly saw myself within the eyes of this paper doll. That was the start of one of the most profound bodies of work I've ever done. It was a body of work called 100 Dolls and Me. It was not meant to be 100 dolls, but the timing of it was unbelievable. I started doing the work and I did the first 2 dolls, and then I did a doll a day, just trying to explore what was going on, trying to follow the scent of the possibility of solutions, trying to track down where I was at fault, trying to decipher the undecipherable, the gaslighting, the lies, the house of mirrors that I had been pushed into without realising. That body of work, 100 Dolls and Me, looking back, is an exploration of abuse. Again, the bomb went off and my house dissolved, my marriage ended immediately, and I was left with these 100 dolls. It was on day 100. I'd got these 100 dolls and I looked back at them and all the evidence I needed was there. I just didn't know what I was drawing, and it got displayed as a art trail, and I loved it. At that body of work, there is supernatural power in that body of work. During the doll work, I again returned to drawing with a blade. It seemed apt because I was furious at the time, so to pick up a blade and a knife to draw seemed very apt, and I really got into paper cutting. I felt defined by everything that I'd lost, everything that was no longer truth, everything that had been taken from me. I felt that that defined me. So to draw the doll as a void became really important to me. I then took the knife to canvas and started cutting into canvas and turning that into machine embroidery. And it was doing that I had this revelation. I've always loved textiles. It's where my journey in art began. And I love lace. I love crochet, and it's all stuff with holes in it. It's made beautiful because of the hole. Even my own child has a hole in her DNA. There is a gap, there is a missing piece of chromosome. Everything I love in life, its beauty is inherent in the holes. And I started drawing and creating these pieces with holes in, but embracing the brokenness. And I did a series of work called Becoming Lace, and the art of watching yourself fall. It was exploring some of the trauma responses I'd lived through: extreme dissociation, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that idea of the whole representing all of that. The paper cutting then continued into another series, which was trying to recover from the post-traumatic stress. A few years working on emotional literacy and trying to recover from codependency and dissociation, and to try and bring my soul back home to myself. And I did another huge series of work called 100 Days of Feel the Feel, another 100 days. A lot of it was sketchbook work and mandala drawing, and that idea of going on the circular journey, the circle coming back in. But I also tried to explore different emotions and develop my emotional vocabulary to heal. And I ended up combining ink work, and this is paper cutting, and layering it. Can you see that's layered? This is like inner child saving. So these are all different forms of emotion, and that idea of inner child work. So both of the characters in these images are me. So you can see the child and the grown-up sitting together. And then this one is about anger, about like falling into the blackness of rage and somebody coming along to pull you out. So drawing with paper cutting then became really important to me, that idea of the circular journey as well, and mandalas. I then went on within that series to explore animal energy and octopus work and octopus energy, and things like that started to come in as my spiritual path started to evolve, and that led me into the tarot. So we are up to date. That is my artwork using techniques and voids and squares and lines. So we finally get to tarot, and it's bizarre because Whiskey, I've done this VR and it's made me realise how really linked it is. I look at the selection of decks that I've pulled that have been the core decks in my first year, and it is incredibly linked to that journey I've just told you through my artwork. My very first ever tarot deck, which I saw before I discovered Tarot Tube, before I even realised that there was anything called a Rider-Waite system. I knew nothing about tarot, but my friend showed me this deck over a phone call, and it was the artwork that spoke to me, the symbolism, the lines, the use of line, the use of colour, the animal energy coming in, the directions of lines, the shapes. I looked at it and I thought, I could read with that. I don't know anything about tarot, but I can read with it. I know that that feels like home. So I ordered this, and that was it. And that's why I've always said I've only done tarot for a year, but I feel like I've done it all my life. It's so linked. So I went to my local metaphysical shop and got a Rider-Waite deck. Didn't really do much for me. It was purely bought as a study deck, but then my dad's voice started coming through it, and now it's so precious to me. My dad comes to me and speaks to me either in dreams still or through this deck. So when I was creating the Mind the Gap work and recovering from Tilly's diagnosis, and my dad's voice was there, he now comes through the cards, and it's incredible. The inner child work I did in that Feel the Feels work led me to this deck. I still work on inner child work. I still have healing to do. And it helps me connect to a part of myself that I need to go back and save on repeat. It is a part of me that lived in my naivety, which got slaughtered by life. My naivety got slaughtered. It's the only way that I can describe it. And I mourned losing my naivety, she says with a troll ring on, for years. I felt like I'd lost a fundamental part of myself until I read the book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves, and I realised that I needed to shed that naivety. It was good it had gone. I was in a new power, which then led me to do pieces like the Bluebeard piece, His Beard Isn't Really That Blue, which again was exploring abusive relationships moving forward until I stopped repeating the lesson. Goddess work as well. There was a lot of my artwork started to, in healing, started to take on a strength to do with goddesses and putting on armour. And the Morrigan and the crow came in. I did a piece that showed a woman's head in armour, and it was about cloaking yourself in power. And then another one with cloaking yourself with feathers. So the goddess artwork kind of married up to the goddess decks. I got the Crow Tarot because of the Morrigan, and the way the Morrigan had supported me through my divorce. She was coming into my art, the feathers were coming in, that repeating line work within feathers was coming in. I then won a deck, the Raincoast Pocket Tarot. So this wasn't a choice, but again, the symbolism with the animals in this, and the crows and the octopus, and the rich imagery and the line work and the colour and the busyness. It kind of all felt like my own style of artwork, and this has a very personal language for me. Morrigan then brought in Bridget, which was a completely new goddess to me, which brought in swans, and I'd always collected swans. This hasn't even been opened yet, so this is the moon journal. Tiny little moon deck with swans on. I haven't opened this yet. Look at that bookmark. Isn't that beautiful? And this is a Christmas present to myself. So these are all moon phases on the back and swans on the front. So again, that's goddess linked to feathers, goddesses. And then the idea of shapes holding meanings as well led me to decks to do with sacred geometry. I am loving using this deck at the moment. I am using this deck to work with the Morrigan, and it is fantastic. I think you might be able to see now the link with my art and the way I read cards, and the shapes and the shapes holding meaning and symbolism and story within shapes. So I'm very pulled to sacred geometry decks, which is why I think the Thoth as well has spoken so strongly to me. I feel it in this deck as well. I feel a symbolism in line and shape and colour that just feeds into my storytelling and my understanding of myself and my psyche and divination. It just feels like home. I mean, look at these. I have a $100 of me that looks so like that. A deck that I haven't done a walkthrough yet because I only received it for Christmas. Again, it was part of my Christmas present to myself. I saw this on Mad Witch on Giselle's channel, and she did a walkthrough, and I can remember just watching the walkthrough about 4 times and then posting a comment saying that is the most beautiful deck I have ever laid my eyes on. The Tarot of the Spirit. And I flipped through it a few times, and I have to say I stick with it. I think this is one of the most beautiful decks I have ever seen. There is something about this deck. I love it. And again, I think it's the shapes and the colours and the patterns holding the meaning, which is funny really, because I also like people in my decks, but there is something when it comes to shapes and reading shapes that feels very at home for me. I'm so excited about owning this deck. This deck, probably more than any really. I just feel a real affinity with this deck. So that's the Tarot of the Spirit by Pamela and Joyce and Joyce Eakins. Another deck that I bought for Christmas. So there was the Tarot of the Spirit, but there was also an Oracle deck. I picked the one indie Oracle deck that I really wanted. And you will see this goes back to my textile roots. The Weaver's Oracle. I did a constructed textiles degree. I learnt to weave. And when I saw this Oracle and decided that I would treat myself to one indie tarot deck for my birthday and one indie Oracle for Christmas, there was no competition to what Oracle it was going to be. It was always going to be an Oracle depicting women and cloth and weavers and their stories and the stories that they weave within cloth. I just adore this deck so much. I'm still to work with it. I am still to read any of the book, but the imagery connects me profoundly to my lifetime in art and textiles and shape and colour, and the fact that that can hold story, profound, deep story. So this is a nice deck to end on, really. It's my latest deck and it profoundly links to my art and tarot snapshot. So that's it, guys. Thank you, Whiskey, for such a lovely tag. I have loved watching people's responses. I need to go and check the tag again and check that there isn't anybody new on there. But yeah, that's why I've always said tarot has just felt like it's felt like an extension of the art. It's felt like I've always done it. There didn't seem to be a big jump. Yes, I had to learn meanings of cards, but really I could have, if I hadn't have wanted to learn the meanings as well and layer that, I could have gone straight into reading just from what I've always done with my art and grabbing the stories out, the shapes and the lines and the colour. So that's it, guys. Goddesses, my dad's voice, motherhood, textile love, trauma responses, healing, all held within art and tarot. And I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.